2021 has seen tensions over Taiwan at its worst in 40 years.
The Chinese government is saying to Taiwan, listen, we can hurt you.
China is bullying Taiwan all the time.
There is no room for compromise.
But this is a conflict that goes beyond Taiwan.
This is fundamentally a superpower rivalry. The war between the United States and China over Taiwan could escalate.
Despite the smiles at a recent summit, uneasiness remains.
President Xi said that the Taiwan issue is like playing with fire.
War over Taiwan is possible.
We are in a big trouble.
The Grand Hotel is an iconic landmark in Taipei, famous for its architecture and history. But beneath the hotel lies a secret. Hidden for over 50 years, until recently.
This Grand Hotel is the only five-star hotel in the whole world that includes 2 escape tunnels. Look at this light. It is encased in this because if a bomb explosion breaks it, the broken glass will not be flying everywhere and hurt anyone. That is why. If you saw the thickness of this wall, it would absorb anything. We were constantly worried that we would be attacked, especially air attacks from China. Today, we always need shelters in case of even natural disasters. So yes, this place would still be a very handy escape route if it ever comes to that. I hope not, God forbid.
Bunkers in Taiwan are not just a relic of the past. Across the island, there are over 100,000 air raid shelters. Yellow stickers in Taiwan indicate underground parking lots where people can take refuge. Air raid drills remain part of life in Taiwan.
Air raid siren going out periodically. Typically, you should stop the activities looking for a nearby protection. This is a good reminder of the people about the war possibilities.
And the possibility of war hangs over the island. This year alone, over 700 Chinese military jets entered Taiwan's air buffer zone, almost double the number in 2020.
This zone around Taiwan, which is called an air defense identification zone, it is actually international airspace. And it's just an area of general security where if aircraft enter into, they should identify themselves.
A record number of China aircraft enter Taiwan's air defense zone. The island is on high alert.
October was a particularly worrying month.
China is bullying Taiwan all the time. But however, in the October, there are almost 150 military aircraft in 4 days. It's really, really unusual. So in my view, I believe China is trying to intimidate Taiwan.
It was alarming in terms of the numbers of aircraft. As one PLA officer told me, Xi Jinping has called on the Chinese military to train realistically, to be prepared for war if it happens tomorrow. And so that's what they're doing. They are training around Taiwan in far more realistic ways than ever before.
It is a sign of aggression. That is what it's meant to be. The Chinese government is saying to Taiwan, listen, we can hurt you. We can hurt you with our bombers. We can hurt you with our fighters. It also signals China's intention to rely more and more on military means to achieve their own goal of national unification.
At the heart of the tensions, Taiwan sees itself as a sovereign state. Beijing, on the other hand, sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, one that separated from China in the Civil War of 1949.
Mao makes his master move. They must surrender.
Nationalist forces were defeated by the communists and forced to flee the mainland for Taiwan.
Fleeing nationalists embarked to cross the ocean for the island of Taiwan.
China sees Taiwan as part of one China, and they call that the one China principle, and it's very uncompromising. So that is the inherent tension in cross-straits relationship.
I think this is a very important issue, not only for Taiwan, not only for Asia, but for the whole world. If there's any conflict in Taiwan Strait, it will not limit only to the two parties.
The fate of Taiwan will be of immense significance to the fate of Asia. Now, this doesn't mean that China, like Genghis Khan, is going to stampede all over the region, but it does mean that Beijing seeks to arrange a regional order. This is fundamentally a superpower rivalry. It's certainly possible that a war between the United States and China over Taiwan could escalate.
If the U.S. does not come to Taiwan's defense, then the credibility of U.S. alliance commitments, particularly in Asia, but also in Europe as well, will really come into question. And U.S. credibility will be greatly diminished in the eyes of all of its partners.
And this is going to have a huge impact on the region. We're talking about the largest, most impactful war that the world has ever seen.
But relations between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China, as Taiwan is also known, haven't always been acrimonious. There have been ebbs and flows, depending on who's in power. Under Ma Ying-jeou, Taiwan's former president, things were cordial.
President Ma, the first Taiwan president to meet with the Chinese leader.
During that time, there were no Chinese bombers incursion. That was a period of peace, calm, and stability that almost been forgotten.
From 2016, things changed. In that year's presidential election, Taiwan voted in Tsai Ing-Wen from the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP. She had positioned herself as a defender of democracy, taking a harder line against China.
The 92 consensus was abandoned by Tsai Ing-wen when she came into office. To the Chinese government, this means a step back.
The 1992 consensus refers to the results of a semi-official meeting between China and Taiwan, which was then ruled by the Kuomintang, or KMT. Both sides acknowledged a one China principle, but what that meant was never clearly defined.
The Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP, they do not accept this because it wasn't negotiated by them. It was negotiated by the opposition. So it did not surprise me, nor did it surprise Beijing. But the Chinese use that as an excuse to end all official communications with Taiwan.
Those lines of communication remain closed.
Without communication line to resolve, it could be a chaotic situation. We have witnessed mounting military pressure, but no phone call can make.
Meanwhile, Tsai is now into her second term as president after a landslide victory in January 2020.
We are still waiting to build good relations with Beijing. So our President Tsai Ing-wen said that Taiwan is waiting to talk to Beijing, but without any political preconditions.
As far as building good relations goes, Tsai has certainly strengthened ties with the United States. First under Trump, and now with Biden. And she has been spending big on defense deals with the US.
The Biden administration has approved the first arms sales to Taiwan. This was a $750 million deal. The Trump administration, they proposed over $17 billion worth over his 4 years in the presidency. And they also agreed to sell some weapons to Taiwan that had been previously off the table, like F-16s. Taiwan itself is trying to increase its own defense spending, $8.6 billion extra towards its defense budget over the next 5 years.
But while the risk of war is serious, and for the people of Taiwan, a constant reality, it's often shrugged off.
The fact that people in Taiwan don't take the threat of a Chinese attack seriously enough reduces Taiwan's security and increases its vulnerability. So, for example, the people of Taiwan probably do not support increasing dramatically the amount of money that's spent on defense. They want to spend money on other things.
But some do see the need to be prepared. This association, for example, conducts classes on survival skills.
协会才会着重于在教育推广，希望让大家觉得说，防灾与自己有关。如果说要在40岁以下，几乎倾向于不会发生。
民众的不会主动会有这个忧患意识。战争的灾害，我觉得比较缺乏这方面的宣导跟警告。
我们这个世代会没有经历过战争，就会觉得比较不会发生。
因为我应该是1990后的，所以我也是从来没有经历过战争，或者是就是这样的事情发生在我成长的过程中。
欢迎收听百灵果 News.
Welcome to Bilingual News, the free.
But it's not just having no experience with war. Amid a generational change, there has been a shift in identity.
Because I was born in Taiwan, I grew up in Taiwan. I never thought myself of being affiliation with China.
They would just say that, oh, your ancestors came from China, so you are Chinese. For me, that makes no sense, right?
People in Taiwan have been enjoying democracy, freedom, rule of law, and human rights for years. If China does not offer too much on that direction, it's very difficult for our people to identify with their system.
Public opinion polls in Taiwan that show a growing number of people in Taiwan defining themselves as exclusively Taiwanese. I think that Beijing finds that very, very worrisome because it makes them more pessimistic that they can achieve their goal of unification peacefully. In my view, it is in Taiwan's interest to have China retain some sliver of hope that peaceful unification is possible. Because if all of that hope evaporates, then the risk of China using force will grow.
So, will China opt for war?
And I think the threat is manifest during this decade, in fact, in the next 6 years.
Xi Jinping became China's president in 2013. He has since gone from strength to strength.
One could argue he's the most powerful leader since Mao Zedong. He's consolidated power and basically in control of all of the levers of government bureaucratic apparatus, including the military, of course. Xi Jinping has really become a penultimate leader. He's really the most powerful leader that China has seen in generations.
When it comes to Taiwan, Xi has repeatedly said it will be reunited with the mainland.
我们绝不允许任何人、任何组织、任何政党，在任何时候、以任何形式，把任何一块中国领土从中国分裂出去。
President Xi, actually, he's very much looking forward to the unification. No country will be happy if part of the country become independent. Spain would not tolerate Catalonia to separate from Spain, and the same is true with the U.S. How can they allow separation from Hawaii or Alaska away from U.S.?
At last month's virtual summit with U.S. President Joe Biden, Xi warned, whoever plays with fire will get burned.
Quite emotive phrase, playing with fire, that definitely adds fresh complications to the relationship.
He meant that there is no room for compromise. If anyone who wants to play with the Taiwan issue by promoting Taiwan independence, then it would meet China's strong opposition and even, military confrontation.
So, could Xi Jinping really go to war over Taiwan?
The use of force is I think, Xi Jinping's worst option and the one he would least like to use. He stated this clearly: China would much rather have peaceful unification with Taiwan. The problem is there's no call within Taiwan to do so. There's no political preference within Taiwan to unify with the mainland. So I think Xi Jinping's current objective is very much focused on preventing Taiwan from declaring independence rather than forcing unification in the near term.
I think why it is unlikely that Xi Jinping will use force against Taiwan. China wants to avoid a major war with the United States. China could lose that war, and losing the war might in fact be to the detriment of Xi Jinping's power and the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party.
In terms of military balance, I think China has the power to take over Taiwan if necessary. However, the use of force is the last resort, because using force carries with a lot of costs. There is direct cost of military confrontation. Second, a lot of people are going to die in Taiwan, and also people on the mainland, the soldiers and the civilians. And also, China has to face the problem of how to deal with destroyed Taiwan.
Countries could align themselves against China. So China could face sanctions, boycotts, tech bans, and it could face ever-growing anti-China coalitions in the global system. So I think for all of those reasons, China is unlikely to use force against Taiwan.
But there are also reasons why China might just go to war.
We cannot rule out any drastic situations. If Taiwan calls for independence, unfortunately, we're seeing, the Tsai Ing-Wen, she appoints the figures of pro-independence in the Taiwanese government and parliament. I think a serious challenge to the status quo would lead to serious consequences.
I think the more that Xi Jinping thinks that he can get Taiwan by force at an acceptable cost, the more tempting that prospect becomes for him. I will say from the elite and strategist level, there are many more people in the category that feel like Taiwan is now within reach. And so while of course there are voices of caution to say that this might be costly in the long term, I think for a lot of individuals within that system, that cost is acceptable, given that the huge benefit would be bringing to an end, now over a 70-year-long civil war.
I think the threat is manifest during this decade, in fact, in the next 6 years.
Top U.S. admirals have warned that China could invade Taiwan sooner rather than later.
I know Admiral Davidson said 6 years. My opinion is this problem is much closer to us than most think.
I think China may see a real potential closing window of opportunity. If you can do something now that you really care about, but you know that that's going to go away in some amount of time, you're really incentivized to act now or soon before that window closes.
People who look at the military balance across the Taiwan Strait argue that Xi Jinping may see a window of opportunity that could last perhaps 5 or maybe 10 years, and then that window of opportunity might close. And so he might be tempted to use force.
So China has a will, now increasingly has a way. Look, what really worries me right now about China's military buildup, China's been building up this incredibly formidable military.
China's military has seen a rapid expansion under Xi.
The PLA's defense budget has grown from around 70 billion in 2010 to over almost 250 billion today, and there's many things in China's military budget that it doesn't account for that other countries would account for. So the actual size of China's defense spending is much greater than the official statistics that they put out.
China enjoys the largest Coast Guard in the world, the largest Navy, has the most advanced cruise and ballistic missile program in the world. It's one of the largest air forces. So they have the numbers, but also in recent years, their technology has become much more advanced as well.
For one, its nuclear capability is growing.
The United States says China's buildup of nuclear forces is concerning. US media has reported that China has begun building more than 100 new missile silos in a desert area.
It's also working on all kinds of new weapons.
Beijing was said to have launched a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile in August, catching US intelligence by surprise.
Beijing insists it was merely a routine spacecraft test. But others disagree, saying these are missiles capable of traveling at more than 5 times the speed of sound.
What's distinctive about hypersonic missiles is that they're very fast and they can also maneuver, which makes it difficult for early warning systems and then missile and air defense systems to intercept them. But I think we should take the Chinese very, very seriously in terms of not only their overall kind of raw power, but also their technological sophistication and their ability to make breakthroughs that could challenge our technological advantage.
If Beijing's formidable military buildup is worrying, so is its use of so-called gray zone tactics.
Gray zone is a form of coercion that one state can apply that's below the threshold of conflict. It's designed to put pressure on another country without leading to an actual kinetic conflict.
Its main purpose is to try to increase the pressure to the opponents little by little. We say that it is all gardens did, but it turns out that your neighbor is hanging out all the time in the gardens. Problem is their garden is just one step away from your house. Can you accept that in any countries? It makes people feared.
An example of China's gray zone tactic? The nearly 150 planes flown close to Taiwan in the first 4 days of October.
I believe they are trying to overwhelm our Air Force by forcing it to fly excessive hours in response to this air incursion.
So this really wears down the pilots in Taiwan, their equipment, they're in constant use. And so this can reduce the readiness of the Taiwan Air Force to have to respond to all these types of tactics. Taiwan has to scramble aircraft to monitor what they're doing. Is this an attack or is this not an attack?
Another kind of gray zone tactic is disinformation. Puma Shen knows all about it. When he's not playing basketball or at his day job lecturing at the university, Puma is with his team at Double Think Lab. This is a Taipei-based NGO that tracks online disinformation and issues warnings against fake news.
So fighting disinformation is just like playing basketball or any other sports. You need to stay one step ahead of your opponent.
Yeah, I mean, we're facing lots of disinformation coming from China, but the purpose is all about discredit our own government. They want to create distrust among our society, to divide our society, and even create hatred among citizens here in Taiwan. So for example, in this May, we're having an outbreak of all the COVID-19 cases, all the Facebook posts, and there are like 480,000 of them. There are lots of disinformation saying that there are a lot of people dying here in Taiwan, and our government is not really controlling the cases. So on the left-hand side are all these websites created by China, and on the right-hand side are the Facebook groups or fan pages in Taiwan. So you can see, for example, this page called Can Watch. They try to disseminate the idea of all these pro-China messages to multiple Facebook groups or fan pages there in Taiwan. And you can see there are lots of volumes actually coming from left to right, from China to Taiwan. Using disinformation campaign first is kind of crucial if you really want to initiate a military war against Taiwan, which means that you should affect Taiwanese citizens first and make sure they might surrender at the very beginning in the first 14 days, and then you can have in the military war in the second.
Coming up next, if it comes to war, will the US defend Taiwan?
It's not an absolute commitment.
Worries that China might seize Taiwan have been growing in Washington for years. One major concern is that Taiwan may not be able to hold the line if attacked.
I mean, it's almost laughable. I mean, China is this enormous dragon, and Taiwan is, maybe a mouse. So, maybe the mouse is sharpening its nails a little bit, but that's nothing compared to what this enormous dragon is capable of doing. The arms sales to Taiwan are extraordinarily modest compared to what the PLA itself is doing. These are capabilities to, at least notionally, to defend Taiwan from attack.
If we still maintain this current kind of military developments, we are in a big trouble because the disparity across straits is bigger and bigger. We just cannot use traditional way to defend ourselves. We must think another way, improve innovation and how to improve the asymmetrical warfare, then can avoid China's military from launching this kind of war. If we insist on the shiny weapon system, we will never be enough on the conventional equipment. We will be failed.
There's also the fact that Taiwan used to have conscription, so all of the eligible males after they graduated from high school would have to serve in the military. Today, conscription is being phased out. So right now, students, after they graduate, they have to serve for only 4 months. It used to be as long as 2 years, and they don't learn very much. They don't even necessarily know how to shoot a gun. So that's a serious problem.
22-year-old Jimmy, who doesn't want his identity revealed, agrees there's a problem. He recently completed his 4-month military training and is a big fan of survival games where players stage mock combats with replica guns.
在生存游戏里面学到的武器操作的部分，肯定会比在国军里面学到的机会多嘛。毕竟现在的玩具枪做的都很拟真，它可以完全的仿真出这个真枪该要怎么模拟去使用的这个动作。对，那因为在部队里面发到的武器种类是比较少的，对你能够操作到的机会不多。
Weapons and training aside, he feels that Taiwan has too many strawberry soldiers.
草莓兵的话，就是现在的年轻人，他们活在比较舒适的状况里面。下雨了不能够出到户外，然后温度一超过32度不能够操课。我自己的很多朋友多半是不愿意去服兵役，多半是会想要逃避。他们会想尽办法在这个体检的时候啦，去预先的增重或者是变得过瘦。然后还有我自己在体检的时候有遇到。有人在装这个假哮喘的这个状况，当然不愿意承认自己是草莓兵啦。发生战争去履行你的兵役是公民的义务，服兵役的话必须得要再延长更多的期限。它还有发生战争的时候，必须得要靠自己的力量啦。美国来的这个可能性是非常非常非常的低。
And that is the big question. If there is war, will the US come to Taiwan's aid? The answer is anyone's guess.
The United States of America and the People's Republic of China have agreed to recognize each other.
In 1979, the US established formal diplomatic relations with China while cutting ties with Taiwan. But that same year, The US also passed the Taiwan Relations Act, which guarantees support for the island.
The US does have the legal requirement to provide for Taiwan's defense, to provide them with arms of a defensive character, but the president will have to make the decision about when the US would actually intervene to defend Taiwan should it be attacked. There's no treaty obligation for the US.
It's very ambiguous. That's why people refer to the US policy towards Taiwan, in particular whether or not the United States would defend Taiwan and under what conditions, as strategic ambiguity.
Strategic ambiguity has worked for decades. It allowed the US to manage China on one side and Taiwan on the other.
It has preserved the peace since 1979. It is a policy that enables the president to keep flexibility as to what he might do in a crisis. It also is useful because it doesn't give Taiwan a blank check.
So a little bit of ambiguity raises question in Taipei's mind about having their own self-deterrence capability. It's not an absolute commitment, because were the US to do that, then Taiwan politicians would have every incentive in the world to not spend on their own defense. But it also ensures that Taiwan doesn't become a hollow military and spend all of its money on social programs.
However, twice in a matter of months, President Biden seemed to abandon strategic ambiguity. In October,
he said that the US would come to the aid of Taiwan, that it would defend Taiwan if needed.
President Joe Biden's comment appears to contradict Washington's policy of strategic ambiguity.
Beijing reacted, and the White House responded.
It's interesting to note how quickly and I guess how forcefully the White House came out to say there is no change in US policy.
The White House had made a similar clarification just 2 months before that.
The US government has been sending mixed messages and sending wrong messages. The so-called slips of tongues, from the Chinese perspective, are probably deliberate, reflecting, what they are thinking at the moment. This would increase the tension in the Taiwan Strait rather than alleviate it.
We're already in this kind of a chaotic situation, trade war, sanctions, deteriorating geopolitical situation in the region, lots of military exercise and back and forth. So this can really deepen the crisis and cause misunderstanding and even miscommunication.
It's really hard for me to understand exactly what's going on with Biden. A lot of people say, oh, maybe this was a gaffe, maybe this was a mistake. President Biden is very smart on the Taiwan issue. He is one of the original signatories of the Taiwan Relations Act. It's hard for me to believe that these are just missteps. I think it's their attempt to get to be between strategic clarity and strategic ambiguity. Some analysts, strategists in the United States have argued for strategic clarity. The idea is that if the United States makes clear to the PRC that the United States would defend Taiwan, that this would be enough to dissuade China.
Tensions have crept up steadily with the Biden administration.
Honored to be here today on behalf of the people and government of Taiwan.
Taiwan's de facto ambassador to the US was invited to Biden's presidential inauguration. This has never happened since Washington stopped diplomatic recognition of Taiwan 40 years ago. Then, more recently, the presence of US troops in Taiwan became an issue.
We've recently heard that US military officers have been in Taiwan training some of Taiwanese troops. I would guess that the Chinese know that this takes place periodically, but talking about these things publicly, I think, runs the risk of heightening tensions because they could back Xi Jinping into a corner. He might be reluctant to be seen as soft on the Taiwan issue. He may feel that he has to be tough and actually take action against Taiwan.
And then there's this. October 2021 marked 50 years since China became part of the United Nations, with Taiwan forced out of the UN. But the Biden administration has been pushing for somewhat of a change.
The United States is not supporting UN membership for Taiwan. It is supporting just greater participation by Taiwan in UN agencies, and particularly the World Health Organization. China is worried that Taiwan might actually be able to find a pathway to having other countries accept its claim to us being an independent sovereign state that is separate from China.
Well, China is very upset and also angry that the US is trying to manipulate this. Now the US is trying to say that, we need to reinterpret the UN resolution. I think it's a serious provocation to China.
China sees US provocations elsewhere too. There's AUKUS, a pact between the US, UK, and Australia on nuclear-powered submarines. And there's Quad, an alliance that includes India, Japan, Australia, and the United States.
The alliances themselves do signal again that there's concern about Chinese behavior. Japan, Australia, the United States, this past June included a sentence in a joint communique that said that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait should be preserved. So having countries speak out publicly, I think that can have a moderating effect on Chinese behavior. AUKUS is a different story. It is about ultimately a plan to build nuclear-powered submarines that will enable Australia to operate close to China, potentially even in the Taiwan Strait, and even play a role if there is a conflict in the future. Now, that may be 20 years or more in the future, but it signals today that Australia is worried about Chinese use of force against Taiwan and that it doesn't want to see that happen.
I don't see the reason why they build up this kind of AUKUS or Quad and maybe trying to aim at China. I mean, China, of course, is not afraid of this, but China has to defend its right. But we really don't want to see this kind of a Cold War things return, and then that could lead to the confrontations.
Chocolates, phones, and Hollywood. How Taiwan affects us all.
我憨憨抱歉对我的错误。
Taiwan is a contentious issue that affects everyone, not just politicians and diplomats.
我爱更尊重中国跟中国人。我憨憨抱歉对我的错误。对不起，我很抱歉。
Hollywood stars have had to say sorry for calling Taiwan a country. Global fashion brands have apologized for similar reasons. China, after all, is the world's biggest trading nation. Today, Professor Puma is at a Taipei store that sells Lithuanian chocolate. The shop has become a mini battleground.
你请问这是立陶宛的巧克力吗？
是，我们都是立陶宛原装进口的巧克力。
Lithuania recently permitted Taiwan to open a de facto embassy using the name Taiwan and not Taipei, which is the more accepted norm.
So buying Lithuanian chocolate right now here in Taiwan is a political statement to support Lithuania. China actually recalled their ambassadors from Lithuania. And also they try to prohibit Lithuania to export the goods to China and pose the threats to the business there in Lithuania.
Chocolates aside, as far as flashpoints go, a big one could well be the island's prized asset.
I think it's not just chocolate, but the little small device that could cause bigger problems. Basically, the microchip.
Taiwan makes nearly all the world's sophisticated microchips, and many of the simpler ones too.
Your cell phone, or washers and dryers, the video games consoles, like everything, even the cars or the weapons, all needs the chips. So semiconductors are important to the weapons or even the warfare itself.
China, on the other hand, is dependent on others to meet its chip needs. Years of US sanctions involving microchips have hurt China.
So China finds itself in a situation very much like Japan found itself in 1941 at the beginning of World War II in the Pacific. They imported all of their oil, almost all of it from the United States. So Japan was in the corner because of the oil embargo that the US had imposed, and they concluded that they had to solve the problem in a military fashion by taking over the oil fields in Southeast Asia. That situation was the proximate cause of World War II in the Pacific, really. China today finds itself in a similar corner with respect to a similar critical input, which is the semiconductor that they depend upon for much of their economy, for much of their military. China finds itself in a position of acute strategic vulnerability now.
I believe that some people are saying, is that possible that Beijing wants to take over Taiwan because they can take over the semiconductor industry? I would say probably not. If they take over the semiconductor industry in Taiwan, the chip industry in Taiwan will not be the same chip industry in Taiwan. They will just ruin the industry.
So I think there are a lot of reasons why this would be a difficult move. The fabrication facilities in Taiwan are probably the most technologically sophisticated manufacturing operations in the history of the world. They are built on 99.9999999% purity quality metric for just about every input, even water, even air. If you had 1 grain of sand in 12 Olympic-sized swimming pools, that would prevent the system from operating correctly. That a military takeover, even if you didn't literally have bomb damage, I think there are so many possible ways in which that grain of sand could slip into the system.
For everyday Taiwanese, life must go on as usual. The specter of war may be ever present, but there will also be the ever-present hope that it will be avoided.
We need to understand that to prevent war, we need to talk to our potential attacker. We need to have a dialogue with Beijing. As long as we can maintain the communication line, we have another layer of protection.
The U.S. maintains its attention, commitment to both Taiwan and U.S. allies in the region, then I think these are important factors to watch that delay that outcome considerably. And I think the prospect of war is diminished.
Absolutely a real possibility that China is going to initiate force across the Taiwan Strait. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. 5 to 7 years should still create a sense of urgency on the part of all countries in the region to try to enhance the deterrence against China. We don't have a lot of time, and at the very best we can just kick the can down the road and delay it a couple more years, but that's better than nothing.
The Taiwan issue has become sort of identity problem. People become irrational. When you are not rational, then you may do something that would, regardless of the consequences. That's very dangerous. Okay? So that's why I hope that the U.S. government should restrain the Taiwan independence activists in Taiwan.
China has a responsibility. China needs to be more creative, a little bit more flexible, find some common ground, instead of sticking stubbornly to a proposal of 1 country, 2 systems, which was never acceptable to the people of Taiwan, but certainly today, after what has transpired in Hong Kong, will never, ever be acceptable to any future generations in Taiwan.
If a country can use military force to unilaterally change the status quo, that will challenge the current rule of law for international order. if we do nothing, if countries in the world don't pay attention to the situation, if people believe this is a Chinese issue, then a war could happen.